Part 18. Good man, he has a golden finger. Author, Jonghu Buletin. Chapter 171. After giving all the prepared things to the noble, village chief Kui retreated and stopped disturbing the noble. Later, the whole Kui family knew that the noble was about to leave, and Kui Zhenshan suddenly said. No wonder the noble taught the method of bean sprouts. It turned out that the noble was leaving. Village chief Kui was a little surprised to hear this. Bean sprouts. Why hadn't he heard of this thing? The eldest daughter-in-law Niang went directly to the kitchen to get bean sprouts, and the old wife said to village chief Kui. It is the method that the noble gave to our villagers to settle down, so that people can eat fresh bean sprouts in winter. As she spoke, Niang took out bean sprouts from the kitchen. The fresh bean sprouts surprised village chief Kui and Kui Mingshan. They didn't know what it was and how to eat it. As a result, after tasting it, they felt that it was extremely fresh. If you eat such a fresh dish in such a winter, it must be something that some rich people will definitely buy. This is also something that only nobles can eat. It is said that the family tradition is profound, and this is what it means. The more aristocratic a family is, the more good prescriptions they have in their hands, from medicine to various methods. Now that the nobleman stayed in Quijia village, he not only rewarded a pearl bracelet, but also gave a good prescription, which immediately made village chief Kui feel emotional. There are many wealthy and noble people in this world, but there are few people as compassionate as the nobleman. Village chief Kui immediately knelt down and kowtowed to the room where Xie Zhou was, just like the villagers. Your Excellency is so kind. We are willing to thank you 1,000 times, and now we can only kowtow here, hoping that God will bless you with a safe life, wealth, and longevity. The Kui family also knelt down and kowtowed, knowing how much thought the nobleman put into giving them these. Although the nobleman is always serious and cold at home, everyone can see his kindness. Xie Zhou was in his room, and saw the new things that the Kui family had put in. There were new tea sets and a small table, which looked very valuable. It was a set of emerald green carved tea sets, which was very beautiful. There was also a green ripple on the table. This green ripple was a gukin, and the wood was green sandalwood. At this time, it looked even more elegant. The orchids that literati loved the most were carved on it, which made people feel very delicate. Xie Zhou laughed immediately, thinking that he was just talking casually, but Kui Mingshan took it to heart and even bought a gukin. He was a good person. In addition to the gukin, there were also white jade flutes and emerald green bamboo flutes. Whether in terms of workmanship or other aspects, they were very beautiful, which made Xie Zhou really love them. Xie Zhou liked these musical instruments very much. When he saw that the Kui family even bought the 4 treasures of the study, he understood the meticulousness of this family. However, he didn't have the heart to practice calligraphy now. It was cold in winter, and even if there was a charcoal fire in the room, it was cold to the bone. He put the 4 treasures of the study into the space, as well as other musical instruments. Today, Xie Zhou suddenly became interested, so he asked Xie Yi to find other servants, and then arranged to go to Milan to enjoy the snow. He had been to Milan several times, but Xie Zhou still liked it very much. This time, he brought tea sets with him, so he could enjoy the scenery in the snow, and make tea and play the piano at the same time, which was a beautiful thing. Today, Xie Zhou was wearing a moon-white coat with gold embroidery on his body. Large patches of golden peonies not only did not make him look vulgar, but also made him feel elegant and luxurious. With the furry cloak, he gave people a noble beauty that was not stained by dust. As soon as he spoke, everyone around him arranged it. Knowing that when the nobleman was going to make tea in Milan, the family had already boiled hot water, and they also planned to boil water near Milan, waiting for the nobleman's instructions at any time. Half an hour later, Xie Zhou got up and went to Milan. The scenery was great today, and even snowflakes were floating. Even so, Xie Zhou was in a good mood. The Kui family was all busy this time. The kitchen prepared the freshest snacks, and they planned to send them over hot. If the benefactor wanted to try them, it was okay. When they arrived at the plum forest, Xie Zhou's tea table was already set up, with a complete set of tea sets on it, and hot tea could be boiled next to it. The softest brocade fabric was made into a cloth mat and spread on the snow, ready to serve the noble at any time. In fact, the farmers didn't quite understand why the noble liked such a scene. It was so cold, and he was not warm at home, but was enjoying the snow and drinking tea in the plum forest. It sounded like such a highbrow thing, but it was not what they imagined. Xie Zhou had been to the ancient world several times before, and warming tea and boiling wine were all okay, as was playing the piano. After the Kui family prepared everything, they all hid far behind the plum forest. Only Xie Zhou sat there, with the snow falling on his shoulders, but it was a different flavor. Then, the sound of the piano came from the plum forest. In such a panic place, the sound of the piano combined with the wind and snow gave it a sense of elegance and lightness, which made many farmers secretly hear it. Although they did not understand it, they still showed their yearning expressions. They did not understand music, but they could appreciate the music. The leisurely and contented sound of the piano made people feel happy when they heard it, and they could not help but smile. Village Chief Kui thought, "Is this the feeling of a noble?" He stayed in Quijia village, not feeling uncomfortable, but so leisurely. At the end of the song, Xie Zhou felt his fingers were a little cold, so he called out, "Xie Yi, come and play the piano." Xie Yi is a robot. As long as he has seen it once, he can imitate it. Therefore, he quickly sat in the position where Xie Zhou was and began to play the piano. The piano sounded melodiously again, but compared with Xie Zhou's leisurely piano sound, Xie Yi's piano sound was completely imitated without any emotion. But even so, it was interesting to be able to hear the piano sound in such a scenery, brew tea, and enjoy the snow. Xie Zhou sat by the tea stove and poured himself a cup of hot tea. His long gown fluttered, and he was as unrestrained as a fairy. Just when the villagers were secretly watching the nobleman enjoying the snow, someone had already come to the village entrance. A young man in a red brocade robe had heard the birth and ran over in a hurry. His young face was full of wonder. After seeing the moon-white figure in the red plum forest, he laughed. "Found you. Interesting guy." "That's right. This person is none other than Shui Baoken, the young master of the imperial merchant Shui family." After receiving the pearl bracelet, he couldn't let it go. However, the more he looked at the pearl bracelet, the more he felt that it should not be just one, but a pair. You know, generally speaking, a single bracelet will be made into a tassel to prove its uniqueness. But each of these pearl bracelets is extremely round, with a total of 10 perfect beads. How could there be only one such good thing? It must be in pairs to be considered top grade. Therefore, Shui Baoken called the housekeeper Zhou and asked him about it. He learned that there was such a noble person. When he heard that the pearl bracelet he bought would allow the people of a village to have a roof over their heads, Shui Baoken became even more curious about this noble person. As a result, you don't know until you ask. After asking, you will find out that among the scholars in Wengxian town, there is a poem about plum blossoms. After a detailed investigation, it is found that it was left by a nobleman living in Quijia village when he was enjoying plum blossoms. In this way, Shui Baoken was even more curious about who this kind-hearted person was. He hurriedly drove from Wengxian town and happened to meet Xie Zhou enjoying plum blossoms and listening to music in the snow. Shui Baoken actually didn't like the so-called aristocratic families. There were also aristocratic families in Jiangnan. Compared with them, their Shui family was at most a nouveau riche and not up to the stage. Later, when their sister became the emperor's concubine, they were still accused of clinging to the powerful. But in fact, those people had no money at all. They looked down on Shwe Baoken with the so-called ancestral disciplines, and they didn't see them paying a penny when the poor suffered disasters. On the contrary, in the mouths of the aristocratic families, ordinary people were pariahs. Pariahs were like grass. If they died, they died. It was not a big deal. Now that he had met this noble who felt sorry for the people and even wrote such a poem, Shwe Baoken was really excited and rushed over. He really wanted to meet this noble. He inexplicably believed that this noble would not look down on him because his family was doing business. This noble must be very interesting. The impulsive Shwe Baoken came on the snow, and there were even snowflakes on his hair. He looked like an uninvited guest, but his face was full of cute smiles. He had fair skin and the flesh on his face that had not yet opened was very cute. He had a baby face and squinted his eyes when he smiled, which was very cute. Although he was disturbed from viewing the scenery, Sieting Zhou did not feel unhappy. This red mascot made people feel good when they saw it. Manager Zhou caught up with him. Seeing that the young master was disturbing others from viewing the scenery and playing the piano, he was helpless. He made an apology to Sieting Zhou, and then took out a cushion and put it in the snow. Shwe Baoken sat down in front of Sieting Zhou. The sound of the piano was melodious, and the 16-year-old child showed a flattering smile. "My dear, may I ask for a cup of tea?" His smiling face was really likable. When Sieting Zhou saw this strange yet familiar face, some chaotic memories came to him. He remembered everything his original body had done in the Great Yang Dynasty. The person in front of him was not only a cute little baby, but also would later become the money bag in charge of all the money shops in the Great Yang Dynasty, and even the youngest minister of the Ministry of Revenue in the Great Yang Dynasty, who was only 22 years old when he was appointed as the minister. And Sieting Zhou also remembered how the original owner relied on the system's golden finger and what he had learned in modern times to disrupt the government in such a great Yang dynasty, change the world, and step by step from a person at the bottom to a noble, and finally ascended to the throne of the emperor who was below one person and above 10,000 people. Oh, I forgot to say that after becoming the emperor, the great Yang dynasty was finally destroyed by the Turks. Good man, he has a golden finger. Author, Zhanghu Buletin Jian. Chapter 172. When he saw Shwe Baoken, Sieting Zhou remembered the memory of his original body. After all, Sieting Zhou came to this world early this time. He came here when he had just graduated and had no job. In order to get the golden finger, he pretended to have no job. Now that he has got the golden finger and came to the great Yang dynasty, he realized how crazy the original owner had done. Compared with Sieting Zhou, who liked to be a nobleman right from the start and was full of aura, the original owner was unprepared for the first time he crossed over, and then he had no identity information. He came here with short hair and was mistaken for a monk who had returned to secular life in the temple. At that time, the original owner did not carry anything with him when he crossed over for the first time, so he thought about selling the glass bead bracelet on his hand. At that time, the bracelet was given to him when he went to buy gold for his girlfriend. The original owner had this intention, but he was caught by someone in action. The glass bead bracelet was sold for 500 taels of gold, but someone had been eyeing him for a long time. Not long after he went out, he was hit by a club, and the gold was robbed. When the original owner woke up, he was saved by a kind lady. This made the original owner have no doubts at all. Instead, he felt that he was the son of destiny and could meet beautiful women wherever he went. After the original owner woke up, he had not traveled through time for the second time. In order to express his gratitude, he gave the lady a small mirror that he had hidden in his clothes before. This thing did not exist in the Yang dynasty. When the original owner was shopping with his girlfriend was looking in the mirror to apply lipstick, and she accidentally dropped the mirror on him. At that time, the original owner did not know that he could go back. He thought that he was superior to others after traveling through time, and he would be successful sooner or later. So he flirted with the maid and wanted to meet the lady. He had no idea that the so-called lady and the glass bracelet were all done by the same family. He was so concerned about the things of the original owner. Later, the glass bracelet bought with 500 taels of gold was sent to the Queen Mother, and the amount reported was worth tens of thousands of gold. However, the original owner did not know that he suddenly found that he could travel back and forth between reality and the world of the Great Yong Dynasty, and if he told modern people that he had a system, the system would automatically block it. In this case, the original owner naturally became arrogant. He took the top-grade red sandalwood from the young lady to sell, and the top-grade gold carvings to sell. He soon had money in his hands. When people have money, they will inevitably have some tricks. The original owner thought of the young lady of the Great Yong Dynasty who was obedient to him, and those cute and pitiful maids. Seeing Wei Qiang who still had to manage him, he naturally couldn't stand it. Then when he was doing business and buying a house in the modern world, he met a beautiful sales lady who sold houses. After a few exchanges, he hooked up with her again, and then bought her a house and a car, which was very arrogant. In this way, the original owner shuttled back and forth between the two worlds. He was very arrogant. The ancient business also began to transport modern things back to research and development. He developed mirrors and glass, which made the young lady's family make a lot of money. Then he met Xue Baokang, the second generation of the ancient merchant Xue family. The first time he met Xue Baokang, he didn't get along very well. They were fighting for the same thing. Xue Baokang chose to give in to the original owner and coax him when he met him for the first time. As long as the original owner wanted to do something, he would immediately become a close brother and stick his neck out. At that time, the original owner thought that he was shocked, and then all the younger brothers came to kneel down, and he didn't notice the turmoil in the whole capital. Except for Xue Baokang, after arriving in the capital, he found that he was even more awesome. When he walked on the road, there were young masters from aristocratic families approaching him and inviting him. When he went to someone's house as a guest, he could see the young lady who was raised by the family with gold and jade. She was so beautiful. This made the original owner feel that he was the son of destiny, but he didn't know that the reason why everyone fawned on him and tried to please him was just because he had a very similar face to the current emperor. Before the emperor ascended the throne, the current queen mother was still the queen. In fact, the emperor was not the only child under her knees, but also a younger brother who was more than 10 years younger than the emperor. As soon as the child was born, the emperor loved him very much. However, the position of the crown prince of the emperor was unstable at that time, and the imperial concubine was aggressive. Seeing that the emperor liked this old son, he even treated the emperor, who was still the crown prince at that time, in every way because of this old son, and even favored the queen. This made the imperial concubine, who had a son and was ambitious, unacceptable. In addition to a son who was 1 year younger than the crown prince, she also had 2 daughters. Although the emperor loved her very much, how could a daughter compare to a prince? This prince was not named. When he was 1 year old, he had the richest fiefdom in the Great Yong Dynasty. That is, the most prosperous Jiangnan was all divided into the fiefdom of this prince. When he was 2 years old, the emperor was almost poisoned. The little prince was the first to discover the poison and fell into a coma. After he was cured, the emperor gave a 2-year-old child the title of king for the first time, which is the Onal king that the people still talk about with relish. The emperor hoped that his youngest child would be safe and happy, and asked His Majesty, who was still the crown prince at the time, to protect his younger brother. However, no one expected that the imperial concubine would be so cruel. When she learned that her son, the second prince, was about to be sent to a bitter cold place to be crowned king, she finally lost her mind and did not want to kill the child, thinking that as long as the emperor died, his son would not have to go to the fiefdom. Under such madness, the imperial concubine used all her connections to ask the imperial kitchen to send soup to Her Majesty. Unexpectedly, King Anil happened to be there at that time. He kept crying. In order to comfort his son, the emperor asked his son to drink it first. Tang died directly in the end. It turned out to be the emperor's soup, which killed the child. This broke the heart of the supreme emperor and devastated the queen who gave birth to an old son. The prince, who was still the prince, was even more heartbroken and must find the culprit to avenge his brother. Preteen children were not allowed to enter the ancestral graves. Thinking of this, the prince was in great pain, as uncomfortable as his father and mother. Later, the entire palace was cleaned and the imperial concubine was arrested. This time the emperor was very cruel. He directly gave the imperial concubine poisonous wine and said that after his death, he would let the second prince guard his tomb. In fact, it was a disguised form of letting the second prince die. Due to the shock of the death of his youngest son, 1 year later, the supreme emperor passed away and passed the position of emperor to the prince. The prince at that time, who is now the Holy Emperor, officially took over the Yang dynasty. In the following years, the management of the Yang dynasty flourished. The most pitiful thing is that his younger brother, King Anil, cannot enter the imperial mausoleum. He can only build a grave next to his father's imperial mausoleum to bury him. He will not have any descendants in the future, which is very sad. The emperor ascended the throne at the age of 22, and his younger brother died at the age of 5. Not long after he ascended the throne, the emperor posthumously granted the title to his former younger brother, and then adopted his and his concubine's eldest son to his younger brother, King Anil, so that his younger brother could have a good life. A descendant worships the incense, and now he is the heir apparent of the famous Anil Palace, and he will have no worries about food and drink in the future. The original owner's face was completely similar to King Anil's, and he was the same age. After he came to the capital, he immediately attracted everyone's attention, because the original owner was really carved from the same mold as the emperor, and he could be determined with the naked eye. The two are brothers. There are a lot of rumors in the capital. The original owner doesn't know about it, but the Holy One already knows about it. He summoned the original owner into the palace, and then quietly confessed his blood, because he clearly watched his brother die with his own eyes and couldn't believe that the 5-year-old child would one day come back to life. But 10 years ago, when he wanted to renovate the coffin for his younger brother's body disappeared, which made the Holy Emperor extremely puzzled. Seeing such a being who is similar to the original owner, naturally there is a hope in the heart, hoping that the brother of the same mother is not dead at all. The original owner didn't know this, and it's strange to say that there is no scientific logic in identifying relatives by dripping blood, but when the original owner's blood dripped into the water, it was strangely fused with the emperor, and the queen mother who also secretly looked at him at the time. Such generality proves the identity of the original owner, who was King Anil, who had been dead for many years. The holy sage was very happy, and the queen mother was also extremely happy. They called the original owner for various inquiries, but found that the original owner was not afraid of their identity, and seemed to be used to it. She felt that this person was his own child, otherwise how could he get along with his relatives so closely? Woolen cloth? If they were ordinary people, they would have been kneeling on the ground and shivering. But I didn't know that the original owner was a modern person and had no certain understanding of imperial power. After learning that the Holy Emperor and the Queen Mother said that he was their relative who had been missing for many years, they were also very surprised. When the two asked him how he had spent these years, they even made up random things to make his identity real, and then became the Anil king of the great Yang dynasty. This was the first king of this dynasty. When the supreme emperor passed away, he took many people with him, so now King Anil is one person below 10,000 people. With this identity, the original owner was even more unscrupulous. He wanted to take the beauties sent by others. When he went to the brothel and saw the courtesan who needed to be rescued, he heroically saved the beauty. The aristocratic family forced him to marry an inhumane noble daughter, and he wanted it too. In the end, Ying Ying Yan had a house full of people. In modern times, she had long forgotten her childhood sweetheart girlfriend and kept all kinds of strange women. He felt that a person like him should lie drunk on the lap of a beautiful woman and wake up. Take control of the world. So as these beauties talked one by one, the original owner swelled. Yes, I am the king of Anil in the Yang dynasty, why can't I continue to move up? If you become the emperor yourself, the entire great Yang dynasty will be yours. The original owner, who had no knowledge of him at all, was reminded by the people around him and poisoned the queen mother and the emperor's brother who doted on him in every possible way. He just waited for the two of them to die so that he could rule the world. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Good man, he has a golden finger. Author, Zhanghu Buletin. Chapter 173. Let's say the original owner has the intelligence level that can only get into an ordinary university in modern times. You let such a person who can't even coax women and can only say I like everyone, become the emperor? Are you kidding? The original owner didn't know. He enjoyed the pursuit of beauties and the various flatteries of the surrounding noble families, so he really thought he was capable. He is an awesome modern man, so he has no pressure to deal with an ancient person, right? And he has such things in his hands, and he can travel back and forth between ancient and modern times. He is so awesome, why can't he be the emperor? Probably the top dream of all time traveling men is to have many wives and concubines, and it would be best if they could change the dynasty. The original owner didn't know that those people flattered him just because he was the king of Anil, and those women were willing to stay with a room full of beautiful women just for the benefits and rights that the original owner could bring. How many of the original owner's so-called relatives oppressed the people in the name of the original owner, and it was the emperor and the empress dowager who cleaned up the mess behind them. As long as his women pretended to cry in front of him, the original owner would believe that they were innocent. As for some aristocratic families, of course they wanted to use the original owner to do more things. In this generation of the great Yang dynasty, after the emperor ascended the throne, he opened up the imperial examinations and relied more on the children of poor families in the court. He even had more or less ideas to suppress the aristocratic chaebol. Even in the palace, only the queen was a daughter of an aristocratic family selected by the emperor, and the other concubines were from small families. It can be said that the aristocratic family was placed at the outermost edge of power. This is also the reason why the original owner had a bunch of concubines from aristocratic families in his backyard. The legitimate daughters of aristocratic families were unwilling to marry such men, and the concubines wanted to take this opportunity to cling to the powerful. So when they came to the original owner one by one, they were either oppressed by their legitimate mothers or wanted to marry some old men in their 70s or 80s by their fathers, which made the original owner love them overflowing, and then he took them all to the palace, which was simply a mess. Under such circumstances, the original owner poisoned the Empress Dowager and the Emperor, and originally thought that he could directly ascend the throne, but there was still a prince under the Emperor. After the Emperor died, it was natural for the prince to ascend the throne. So the original owner did not stop, and directly killed all the Emperor's children, and then ascended the throne with the support of the aristocratic family. After becoming the emperor, the original owner sat on the dragon throne happily. How could he know how to handle political affairs? So all these powers were handed over to the aristocratic family, who bullied the people wantonly, and then turned all the people's land into their own, and then raised taxes, and even increased various head taxes, etc., causing the people to sell themselves and become slaves of the aristocratic family. A powerful Daong dynasty originally attracted the covetous eyes of the Turks, but now the Daong dynasty began to rot from the inside. Because of the appearance of the original owner, the Daong dynasty began to popularize those useless glassware, and some useless things such as mirrors. The original owner did not know how to manage the court and manage the country, and he was hanging out with those beauties every day. In order to make the emperor happy, the noble families under him even collected all kinds of beauties in the territory of the great Yong dynasty and presented them to him, which made the original owner even more crazy. He almost stopped handling state affairs, thinking that the noble families helped to handle it well. He could not see the suffering people of the great Yong dynasty and the increasingly fat Turks. Every time the Turks attacked, the emperor would fight back when he was alive, because the emperor believed that fighting back would prevent the other party from acting rashly. But the original owner did not care about state affairs, and the noble families did not want to fight. If they fought, they would lose a few points of benefits. As the saying goes, there is no emperor for 1,000 years, but there are noble families for 1,000 years. Now, with the support of the original owner, the noble families have become fat and strong, and the people are living in misery. Under such circumstances, the original owner had no idea that the Turks were coming. By the time he reacted, the Turks had already reached the capital. The territory of the great Yong dynasty was full of starving people, and the bodies of the people of the great Yong dynasty were everywhere. There was almost a river of blood, and the ground was bloody. The noble families had already fled, and even surrendered to the enemy, just to survive. But the original owner was the emperor, and it was impossible for him to surrender. Those Turks would kill him sooner or later. In this situation, the original owner returned to the modern world. He was still frightened. Although he was already middle-aged, he really didn't dare to go to the great Yong dynasty again when he thought of the fall of the great Yong dynasty. At least there were a lot of good things in the system warehouse. The original owner lived a good life in the modern world, and was surrounded by beauties, which was no different from the ancient times. But after another 2 years, the original owner was set up by someone, and all the money in his hands disappeared without a trace. In the end, he could only continue to return to the great Yong dynasty, thinking that he could still get something from the great Yong dynasty. However, he never expected that in 2 years, the Turks established a new dynasty in the Yong dynasty, and all the Han people became slaves. The Han people looked different from the Turks, so the original owner was caught by the Turks as soon as he returned to the Yong dynasty, and the word slave was burned on his face, which made the original owner miserable. He originally wanted to travel back to the modern times, but he didn't expect that the Turks' knives were faster. In the end, the original owner died in the hands of the Turks, just like all the people in the Yong dynasty, and because he was about to disappear before his death, the original owner's body was cut into pieces after his death, fearing the gods. At this moment, Xietingzhou finally remembered all the memories about the original owner, and felt that such a stupid person, who obviously had the top start, turned a good hand into a bad hand, was really helpless. The most important thing for people living in this world is to understand clearly what they should do, what they should not do, and their abilities. The original owner has become the king of peace in the Yong dynasty. If he doesn't cause trouble, he can live happily for the rest of his life. However, the original owner wants to do something to gain power over the world. So who will die if he doesn't die? At this moment, I saw the familiar young man in front of me, the future Minister of Household Affairs. Xue Baoken was just a businessman, but he went to the battlefield before the Yong dynasty was destroyed, and died in the battle afterwards. No one knows what happened to this boy, and no one knows what Xue Baoken looked like when he died. He was like the most inconspicuous star, gathered in the starlight in the sky, and died at the same place as the people of Great Yong dynasty. This young man, who was a businessman, knew that after the country was destroyed and the family was destroyed, the people were in dire straits, so he tried hard to change everything on his own, but in the end he died quietly. Xietingzhou poured a cup of tea for the other party and placed it in front of him. "Ken," he said, with a slight smile on his jade-like face. Xue Baoken, who came uninvited, picked up the teacup happily, then took a sip of the tea in the cup, and suddenly frowned. How can such a common thing be worthy of a divine figure like you? Uncle Joe, go and get the Dahongbao of the Wei Mountain mother tree from my car, so that you can appreciate it. This big red robe from Wei Mountain is a tribute, that is, the Xue family has made meritorious deeds before, and the Holy Spirit rewarded some of them. Because the little ancestor of the family likes them, they are all here with Xue Baoken. In the past, the little ancestor was absolutely reluctant to share with others, but now he is very generous. Manager Joe immediately took out the tea leaves from the car. There was only a small piece, but it was worth tens of thousands of gold. Even if you have money, you may not be able to buy this thing. After all, this thing is a top-notch gift to the emperor. Good tea. Kui Mingshan on the side had already walked over. After seeing that the nobleman seemed to really want to taste the wine brought by the young man in red, he changed the hot water with new water. Then he saw Xue Baoken making tea himself, while Xie Tingzhou was sitting there, like a guest. The gukkan in Xie Yi's hand did not stop. The falling snow and red plum blossoms, coupled with the leisurely sound of the gukkan. In the past, Xue Baoken must have said that those so-called literati were arty, but now sitting with such a fairy figure, even if it is a little cold, but Xue Baoken felt warm and comfortable in his heart. Now I can understand why those literati like red plums and why they like to cook tea around the stove in such a cold weather. Not to mention, it is really interesting. Although his status is not that high, his family hired a professional master to teach him, and his tea-making skills are very neat. Every move he makes is as elegant as a painting. Coupled with the appearance of the young man in red and brocade robes, he is very good at making tea. Naturally, Xie Tingzhou wouldn't feel bored having sex with such a smiling child. My lord, please have a taste. Although he didn't know who the other party was, Xue Baoken, who had seen a lot of people in the market, knew that the other party must be a big shot just by looking at his clothes and aura, so he followed the people in the village and called him noble. Anyway, in business, it's like this day when you lower your head to ask for help and raise your head to ask for help. If it was this noble man he saw every day, Xue Baoken felt that asking for business would not be that difficult. Xie Tingzhou picked up the teacup and took a sip. Sure enough, it was different from the ordinary tea leaves before. This time the tea leaves were purchased by village chief Kui in Wengxian town. One tael of tea leaves cost 200 taels of silver, but compared to today's the Dahongbao is completely different. Good tea. Xie Tingzhou spoke, his voice as cold as the collision of jade, and Xue Baoken smiled happily and introduced himself. It's fine if you like me, my lord. I am Xue Baoken from the Xue family of the Imperial Shang. I am 16 this year. I take the liberty of disturbing you today. I hope you will forgive me, Lord. His beautiful cat eyes sparkled so brightly that people couldn't bear to get angry with him when they saw it. It doesn't matter. Xie Tingzhou still spoke little, but Xue Baoken chattered endlessly. I took the liberty of visiting you today. I also heard from Uncle Joe that you passed by Quijia village and left a pearl bracelet as a reward. You pity the common people for not having a piece of tile to cover their heads. Although I am young, I have seen many young masters from aristocratic families. Now after hearing what you did, I felt great admiration for you, so I came to see you. The nobleman is indeed as bright as the bright moon and is as awe-inspiring as I thought. He poured the ecstasy soup towards Xie Tingzhou, but looking at you with such eyes, it seemed a little more sincere. Xie Tingzhou already knew the other party's intention, so he took off another pearl bracelet from his neck and placed it on the table. I am destined to meet you today, so I will give this to you. Good man, he has a golden finger. Author, Zhanghu Buletin Jian. Chapter 174. Although Xue Baoken came here just for this bracelet, it was different from being given it as a gift to buying it with his own money. He picked up the pearl bracelet happily, and then looked at the nobleman in front of him with a smile. The nobleman gave such a valuable thing to me when we met for the first time. Could it be that I fell in love with him at first sight? He was joking like a naughty boy, but he never thought that Xieting would actually nod seriously. Yes, you and I hit it off right away. Xue Baokeng had a shrewd mind, and Xieting quite liked this child. Besides, for Xieting's whose long life, Xue Baokeng was just a child. As the person involved, Xue Baokeng suddenly smiled and his eyebrows blossomed. At this time, his chubby little face was a bit indescribably cute. I knew that the person who could take out a string of pearl bracelets and reward them to the people must be the one who fell in love with me at first sight. In a few days, I will go to Beijing to present gifts. Do you still plan to stay in Quijia village? He asked without hesitation. In fact, he knew that it was time for Xieting to leave, otherwise he would not have given such expensive things to the farmers. Although it was nice to enjoy plum blossoms in winter, it was not as comfortable as the scenery of thousands of miles on the road. Such a person, if they could go to Beijing together, Xue Baokeng felt that he would be extremely happy. I'm leaving soon. Xieting didn't hide anything and understood what this little guy meant. Sure enough, Xue Baokeng's eyes lit up immediately and he said happily. Why don't you, noble man, come with me? My Xue family is not around. We have a lot of money. This year is different from previous years. Next year will be the 60th birthday of the Queen Mother. This year's capital is extremely prosperous, and it is worth a visit. Although he didn't know where this nobleman came from, it didn't stop Kui Baokeng from inviting him to go to the capital together. After all, it was too boring to be alone. If he had such an immortal figure by his side, he would naturally feel comfortable in every possible way. By then, even watching the snow in the carriage would be more comfortable than being alone. Ken. Xieting gave a promising answer, and the two of them agreed to go together in just a few words. This made Xue Baokeng extremely happy. He poured himself a few sips of tea, but he couldn't taste anything. The people in Quijia village secretly watched the nobleman enjoying the snow and drinking tea, but the new little nobleman also did not dare to come forward and disturb him. After half an hour, they left Milan and returned to Quijia village. Xue Baokeng looked down on the Kui family a bit, but he would not express it openly. After all, Quijia had to deal with it all night. After eating fresh bean sprouts for dinner, I realized that this farmer also had merits. After learning that the bean sprouts were a secret recipe given by Xieting, I didn't ask any more questions. In fact, there are greenhouses in Jiangnan and Beijing to grow vegetables, but the prices are high and ordinary people cannot afford them, and it is not easy to find farmers who grow winter vegetables. Xieting, who had lived in Quijia village for less than half a month, was about to leave. Village Chief Kui had notified all the villagers last night, so after Xieting and Xue Baokeng had breakfast and were about to go on the road, they saw that everyone in the village was holding a red plum, and then fell to his knees. Wish you a safe journey, noble man. Village Chief Kui led everyone to kneel down. The whole village knelt down with a roar, which was very spectacular, and everyone held the red plum in their hands, which represented their feelings. The nobleman left and took the nobleman's hand. The best remedy is to kneel down and kowtow. Xieting stood in front of the carriage, looked at the kneeling villagers of Quijia village, and said, "Go back and live well." His words made everyone burst into tears, because in the Yang dynasty, farmers lived a difficult life, and being able to live well was already the luckiest thing in the world. In the end, Xieting got on the carriage, and Xue Baokeng didn't get on his own either. Instead, he followed Xieting into the carriage. Inside, after all, when Xue Baokeng goes out, there are a bunch of people waiting on him. When the carriage slowly left Quijia village, the people in Quijia village were still kneeling on the ground. The plum blossoms in their hands were placed outside the carriage windows. When the cold wind blew, there was a burst of red plum fragrance. Shwe Baoken looked at Xietingzhou with interest, his eyes filled with admiration. "My lord, do you know? The last time I saw the people kneeling so sincerely was when there was a flood in Jiangnan. My father donated millions of grains to the people in Jiangnan and gained their love. At that time people kneel at the door of my house every day to pray for my father's long life. You are now loved by the people of Quijia village just like my father. Unlike those noble people who have their eyes set high above their heads, and unlike those so-called noblemen from aristocratic families, Shwe Baoken had personally seen a nobleman's carriage hit a pregnant woman to death, and had seen a young lady from an aristocratic family bully others, so Shwe Baoken didn't like those people very much. So can I know your nobleman's name? I don't know how to call you nobleman. We met yesterday, but today we still don't know each other's name." Shwe Baoken felt that if he had met someone else, he would have left long ago. How could he be like now? He looked at the person eagerly, trying to get a name out of his mouth. Xietingzhou. Xietingzhou was not stingy about his name. After saying it, Shwe Baoken was stunned for a moment and then said, "This is still the same surname as the Holy One, but Brother Xie's name is good, so I will just call him Brother Xie from now on." Knowing someone's name, Shwe Baoken is like this. If he likes someone, he will naturally do everything possible to please him. If he doesn't like someone, he will never say another word to him. Yes, Xietingzhou nodded. He wasn't too bored with this 16-year-old baby. He listened to his chatter all the way to Wengxian town. Afterwards, Xietingzhou moved into Ziwixian Tower, and naturally Shwe Baoken paid the bill. "Brother Xie, let's have a taste of the Ziwixian brewing from Ziwixian Lu. We will continue on our way after 2 more people. Brother Xie's carriage is really too small and not very comfortable. Why don't you come with me and take mine? The carriage was carefully built for me by my father. It has a spacious place where Brother Xie can rest easily." Shwe Baoken poured some wine and drank with Xietingzhou. "This is the first time I tried ancient wine. The alcohol content of this wine is only a dozen degrees at most. It does not taste spicy, but is refreshing and refreshing. In winter, after drinking a thin glass of wine, I feel warm in my abdomen. Besides, there is also soju to drink and a few side dishes, which is really good. Ken." He held the cup and drank with Shwe Baoken, but he didn't expect that Shwe Baoken drank directly from a jar of wine. His cheeks were red, and he was so drunk that he couldn't understand his words. "Thank you, brother. You don't know, I have met some King Hikui family, Lanjiawang family, Jingzhaowei family, those so-called aristocratic families, just a random branch dare to look down on me, dad. They say that we are money-minded businessmen and worms in the country, but they don't even look at it. Such a big thing happened in Jiangnan back then. Those aristocratic families fled one after another, and they were as embarrassed as snakes and rats. If it weren't for my father, Jiangnan would still be here today. Can this be done?" He seemed drunk and was chattering a little. Butler Joe standing beside him wanted to stop him, but he couldn't. Xietingzhou was drinking from a wine glass, looking at the falling snow outside the window, and heard Shwe Baoken's words. "And my sister? My sister is the 3rd rank Jiu who has been personally conferred by the Holy Emperor. Why do they look down on us? Why do they say that our family pulls women's skirts to get to the top? Our family has also done a lot of things for the Holy Emperor." Before he could finish his words, Butler Joe immediately covered his mouth. He did not allow the young master himself to talk nonsense in front of strangers. Even if he knew that the person in front of him had an unusual identity and was deeply liked by the young master, he could not do it. If such random talk spreads, I'm afraid there will be disaster. "My lord, my young master is drunk. Can I help him go back to rest first?" He spoke awkwardly with a flattering smile on his face, but Sieting Zhou did not embarrass him. Go back. With such a drinking ability, if he goes to the capital and interacts with those dandy boys or young masters from aristocratic families, wouldn't he be sure to cheat every one of them? After the people left, Sieting Zhou sat in the restaurant, drinking warm wine, and looking at the ancient buildings outside the window. He felt an indescribable sadness. When he thought of the Turks waving their troops down, the entire Yang dynasty, the people of the capital were in dire straits, and in the end, each and every one of them turned into an existence like an animal. Sieting Zhou did not allow this to happen. So that night, Sieting Zhou returned to the modern study room and bought many telescopes from nearby shops. If there was a war, these telescopes would be equivalent to cheating in ancient times. What they saw could directly determine the outcome of the battle. Defeat. He purchased 3,000 telescopes at one time. Fortunately, in the modern world, these things are cheap and don't cost much. Glancing at his bank balance, Sieting Zhou checked the stock market again. Even if he didn't sell some of the items brought back by the great Yang dynasty, Sieting Zhou still had a lot of money in his hands. At this moment, the system warehouse has been expanded to 10 square meters, which can store a lot of things and can be taken out instantly. When Xue Baoqiang woke up from drunkenness, he had forgotten what he had said before, so he tugged on Butler Zhou's sleeve and asked. I'm not embarrassed in front of Brother Xie, am I? Housekeeper Zhou thought to himself, what if I just scolded those aristocratic families? Mr. Xie seems to be a nobleman carefully raised by a noble family, but I don't know which family he belongs to. This Xie, except for the Emperor Xie family, I have never heard of anyone who can stand out. You must know that the Xie family was a famous family back then, but the emperor of the previous generation was unkind and the people were in dire straits, so the Xie family changed dynasties. Now it has only been 300 years. No. After hearing this, Xue Baoqiang became happy, and then went to have tea and wine tasting with Sieting Zhou. He was so happy. Another day passed and it was time to set off. Sieting Zhou and Xue Baoqiang sat in his 2-meter-wide top-notch luxury carriage and started on the road to the capital. Good man, he has a golden finger. Author, Zhanghu Buletin Jian. Chapter 175. It takes about a month to get to the capital. We were in Quijia village in October, and it was the end of October when we left Wengxian town, so we were on the road for the whole month of November. The Xue family's convoy had more than 3,000 people, hundreds of them were transporting goods, more than 1,000 were guards hired by the Xue family, specially used to protect the young master who was going on a long journey for the first time, and the rest were escorts. Because there was a lot of money to be escorted this time, the most powerful escorts from various escort agencies were invited to escort. This convoy not only had gifts for the Queen Mother, but also millions of taels of silver, so after leaving Wengxian town, they always took the official road. This is to talk about the current emperor. The current emperor is a decisive person. After ascending the throne, he carried out a bandit clearance operation. All the so-called villages near the official road were cleared by officials from each place. The imperial court issued an order to eliminate bandits, and ordered the government offices in various places to send people and soldiers to eliminate bandits. All the money collected was used to repair the local area. In this way, within 3 years, there was no trace of bandits in various places in the great Yang dynasty. After all, in the eyes of the soldiers, these bandits were not bandits at all. It was money, okay. Many bandits were wiped out, and only then did we have such a stable business road today. Moreover, the current emperor pays great attention to the development of the national treasury. In the case of national tax reduction and exemption, some businesses will be supported a little, just so that the soldiers on the border will have a better life when fighting. Of course, the taxes on merchants are much higher than those on farmers, and there are also fees for taking official roads, which are also an income for the great Yang dynasty. However, Xue Baoken knows that no matter how much money a merchant has, it will eventually be given to the emperor. The emperor controls the money house, and no matter how smart the merchant is, how can he fight against the emperor? Now, I have been on the official road for a month. When I arrive at certain areas, I will stop and rest. I have seen many beautiful scenery, local customs, and the enthusiasm of the people. The emperor is a real wise monarch now. Since the emperor's rank, the students in Jiangnan have gone crazy. But unfortunately, I am a merchant. If I want to take the exam, I am afraid I have to leave my official status. If I become an official, there will be no one to take care of my family's business. So this time, in addition to sending tribute to the Empress Dowager for my sister's birthday, I also want to see if there is a chance to get the Emperor's grace. If I can see him, it will be smoke in our ancestral graves. Sitting in the car, Xue Baoken ate fruit while talking to Xie Tingzhou. He knew that his brother Xie was a man of few words, but he was very capable. They met some people along the way. The imperial merchant Xue family came to Beijing and might have treasures. Naturally, some desperate bandits wanted to move their mines, but they were discovered by brother Xie's servants before they met. Xue Baoken will always remember that in just a cup of tea, Xie Yi returned with blood all over his body. After asking, he found out that there were bandits lying in ambush ahead, as many as 800 of them, and in just a cup of tea, Xie Yi killed all of them. When the convoy arrived there, they saw the mess on the ground and knew that these bandits were bad guys, and they would be horrified unconsciously. The whole convoy looked at Xie Tingzhou, who lived with Xue Baoken in the car, differently. How could he be an ordinary person with such a peerless master around him? Xie Yi fought against 100 people alone, and even almost slaughtered thousands of people. In the end, these bandits were handed over to the passing county magistrate. After confirming that they were bandits, they also gave Xie Yi some silver money rewarded by the court. At this point, Xue Baoken felt that brother Xie was very mysterious, and the more so, the more he stuck to Xie Tingzhou. He had never said anything to others before, and now he did not hesitate to tell Xie Tingzhou. "You are very talented in business." Xie Tingzhou heard Xue Baoken's complaints, but his words comforted Xue Baoken and made Xue Baoken laugh. "That's right. I knew how to do business when I was 10 years old. At that time, my mother gave me her dowry farm and shop to practice with. I doubled my mother's shop in 1 year. But it's not easy to do business. The common people depend on the weather for their food. If the weather is good, there will be more food. If the weather is not good, there will be less food. Human power can't do anything." Xue Baoken sighed. Although he was born in a wealthy family, he had seen the displaced people. Naturally, he knew that only when the court was good could the people be better. Compared with the past, the people's lives have been getting better and better. "That's true." Xie Tingzhou agreed with Xue Baoken's words. After all, for growing crops, apart from modern high-tech planting, there was no weather forecast in the ancient environment, so it was naturally impossible to grow good crops. Xie Tingzhou knew that most of the food here was grain, that is, wheat. The harvest at the end of the year was just over 200 kilograms per mu of land, which was considered a good harvest. Even so, the people worked hard to survive. Xie Tingzhou already knew how to witness this dynasty and how to do it. About 10 days later, in mid-December, the Xue family's convoy finally arrived in the capital smoothly. The city guards in the capital were carefully checking everyone entering the city. Seeing that the year was coming to an end, there were many people coming and going in the capital, and they were also very busy. The Xue family's convoy stopped there and handed over the household registration, including Xie Tingzhou's fake household registration. Of course, they finally entered the city smoothly. It was already 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and the sky gradually darkened, but the entire capital was brightly lit, and there was a peaceful and happy atmosphere everywhere. At this moment, they happened to encounter a lantern festival. What they could see were lanterns of various shapes, and the floors on both sides were also hung with bright red lanterns, as if implying a prosperous year. The capital is so lively. It's much more lively than our Jiangnan. Brother Xie, let's go down to see the lantern festival. After all, they were still children. When Shui Baokeng saw the dazzling lights, he was excited to get off the car to play. Xie Tingzhou also thought that the capital of the great Yang dynasty was good, so he nodded. The two got off the car together. Butler Zhou had no choice but to arrange for the caravan to go home. The Shui family had bought a house in the capital a long time ago, so they arranged 4 strong servants to follow the little ancestor. Xie Yi naturally followed Xie Tingzhou. He was a robot. If he really started the lethal behavior, he would be able to kill everyone in a city. Behind him were 2 strong servants sent by village chief Kui, and the maid followed him to Shui's house. Shui Baokeng looked at everything around him with sparkling eyes, feeling full of freshness. Although it was very cold, it did not hinder Shui Baokeng's excitement and enthusiasm. He rolled up his red cloak, revealing a chubby little face, very cute. Xie Tingzhou was much taller than him. At this time, he was wearing a black robe and a black cloak outside. In the night, his face was as white as jade. With the light projected on his face, he looked dreamy and blurred. Brother Xie, this is my first time in the capital. The capital is so lively. Look, there are lanterns for sale over there. Let's go and have a look. Shui Baokeng, who was childish, walked towards the lantern stall, and then came to the lantern stall. He saw all kinds of lanterns on the stall, some made into little rabbits, some made into puppies. Don't underestimate the wisdom of the ancient people. These lanterns were made lifelike and can be said to be very beautiful. Of course, there are also exquisitely crafted lanterns with carved beams and painted walls. The gold on them is made of real gold. It is expensive and beautiful, and naturally worth a lot of money. Shui Baokeng fell in love with this gorgeous lantern at first sight. How much is this lantern? He asked the shopkeeper and got an answer immediately. To answer the young master, this Jinliyubi lamp is made by the most powerful craftsman in Beijing. It is 200 taels of silver. This lamp is worth this money. Shui Baokeng waved his hand, and the servant next to him went to pay the bill. He also turned his head to look at Xie Tingzhou. Brother Xie, don't you want to choose a lamp? I'll give it to you. At Shui Baokeng's strong invitation, Xie Tingzhou also chose a lamp, a rabbit jade lamp, which was very beautifully carved and looked even happier. His girlfriend was born in the year of the rabbit, and Xie Tingzhou thought that if he showed this lamp to his girlfriend, she would definitely be very happy. This lantern cost 100 taels, which was nothing to Shui Baokeng. He invited Xie Tingzhou to go forward again. Such a nobleman dressed in noble clothes, holding a white and tender rabbit palace lantern in his hand, not to mention, there was a bit of contrast and cuteness, which made many people around secretly look at him. Shui Baokeng was extremely curious about everything in the capital. He would buy things when he passed by a stall, such as food and jade pendants. Anyway, he obviously had them before, but he still wanted to buy them, even buying double, and threw them directly to the servants behind Xie Tingzhou, asking them to take them as his gifts. The caravan almost encountered bandits before. If it weren't for Xie Yi, their caravan would definitely lose people. Xie Tingzhou followed Shui Baokeng through the crowd like taking a child. This kind of bustle was quite interesting. But in this street full of lanterns, a beautiful boy sitting in the white jade building admiring the beautiful scenery stood up in disbelief when his eyes fell on Xie Tingzhou's face in the crowd. He stared at Xie Tingzhou and bit his lips unconsciously, he just couldn't believe what he saw. Xie Tingzhou felt someone's fiery gaze in the crowd, turned his head and looked over. At this moment, he met the shocked phoenix eyes of the beautiful boy. The young man in the moon-white brocade robe upstairs was so beautiful that it was hard to tell whether he was a man or a woman. He looked at Xie Zhou downstairs in shock. The next moment, he saw that the young man actually jumped out of the three-story restaurant window, stepped on the eaves, and then landed in front of Xie Zhou in a few steps. The servants upstairs were frightened and shouted madly, but the young man was already standing in front of Xie Zhou. "Hey, this prince asks you, who are you? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Good man, he has a golden finger." Author, Zhanghu Buletin Jian. Chapter 176. In the bright and warm lights, a young man in a moon-white brocade robe suddenly appeared. At this time, he had a high ponytail and a jade crown of the same color on his head. He made the whole person even more beautiful. In addition, these pair of shoes were very iconic. Xing's phoenix eyes are very similar to Xie Zhou's. This person is none other than Xie Jinyu, the eldest son of Anil Mansion, who was adopted into the lap of King Anil 15 years ago. His appearance is gorgeous, and he is even more like the concubine of the Holy Emperor, who is now the concubine de. When Xie Jinyu was 1 year old, she was adopted by King Anil, who passed away at the age of 5. If she were an ordinary family, she would definitely not be allowed to do so. But when the Holy One ascended the throne, he had a very close relationship with King Anil and had a deep brotherly love. This led to the fact that the Holy One left Prince Anil's palace and fief after he ascended the throne. 2 years after he ascended the throne, he was afraid that his younger brother was under the ground. With no one to support him, he adopted his eldest son. At this point, Prince Anil has a son, and what Xie Jinyu will inherit in the future is the throne and future fiefdom of Prince Anil. It can be said that he has taken advantage of it. Even if he does not have to fight for power, he can already live a good life of wealth. At this moment, this young man, who was envied by many concubines in the palace, was looking at the noble young man in front of him with burning eyes. He simply couldn't believe that there was someone in this world who looked so similar to his father. Man, and this man is still so young. The emperor was already 40 years old. In ancient times, it was considered the age to step into the grave. People have begun to grow old. However, Xie Zhou was as tall as jade. He was at the age when he was so handsome that Xie Jinyu unconsciously thought of a person. Thinking that 10 years ago, the Holy Emperor finally resisted the pressure of the courtiers and insisted on moving the cemetery of his father, King Anil, in order to allow his father to enjoy the incense of the children after the Xie family. This matter was discussed in the court at that time. The discussion lasted for several months because many people believed that preteen children should not be allowed to be buried in ancestral graves. His father died young when he was young, and the Holy Father was already sad. Every time he mentioned it, he would hug and cry with the Queen Mother. Later, the matter was successful, but the ministers sent there brought back a strange news. That is, the body of his father Anil Wang has disappeared. That's right. King Anil died early, but he was favored by the Supreme Emperor. Although he could not be buried in the imperial mausoleum, he found a geomantic treasure land next to the imperial mausoleum. At that time, he was buried with many good things. As a result, when the minister went to move the tomb, only to find that the various rare antiques buried there were still there, but the only corpse that should be there was missing. At that time, the Holy Emperor was furious when he learned the news. As his son, Xie Jinyu never expected that, and Zhong didn't know how the Queen Mother appeased the Holy Emperor. Anyway, the tomb was moved in the end. Now that he knew such a weird thing, Xie Jinyu simply didn't dare to think about the man in front of him who looked nothing like him but looked exactly like the holy sage when he was young. Xie Zhou also looked at the young man in front of him and recognized the other person's identity. It turned out that this was the child left by the emperor for himself. It was strange to say that. Xie Zhou searched all the memories of the original owner and found that the original owner was not completely false. And the emergence of a system that can connect the two worlds also requires a carrier. The carrier is the body of the original owner, and the carrier of the great Yang dynasty becomes the original king of Anil. In other words, in a sense, Xie Zhou is the Xie Zhou of the modern world and the king of Anil of the great Yang dynasty. The blood is exactly the same carrier. The two of them looked at each other, both of them had upturned phoenix eyes. This is a unique characteristic of the Xie family. When looking at people with their phoenix eyes, there is a sense of scrutiny. If it is on the holy sage, it is eyes of ambition that look down upon the world. Before the two people could speak, Shui Baokeng spoke. Why are you so rude? Don't you know how to introduce yourself before asking someone their name? Shui Baokeng admitted that Brother Xie was more attractive, but it would be bad to attract such a presumptuous person. Although the other person was indeed pretty, Shui Baokeng still wanted to stand by Brother Xie. Following Shui Baokeng's words, the servant from the third floor of the restaurant had already chased him down, his face turned pale with fright. Your Majesty! Your Majesty, you just scared me to death. The person who spoke was a handsome man wearing a blue robe, but his voice sounded like a woman's. He could tell that he was a eunuch. Xie Jinyu, whose identity was revealed, withdrew his gaze. Why are you howling? Isn't this prince enjoying himself here? It's just the third floor, what are you afraid of? Xie Jinyu, who has been both civil and military since childhood, is naturally not afraid of coming down from the third floor, but the servants around him are worried to death. After finishing speaking, the servant looked at Xie Zhou again, raised his lips and said. My eldest son is Xie Jinyu, the only son of King Anil. Who are you? Why don't you tell me your name quickly? This person looks similar to his father when he was young. That guess may not be true, but if this person uses this appearance to do bad things, Xie Jinyu will not let it go. Xie Jinyu may seem arrogant, but in fact, he has given Xie Zhou a lot of face. There are not many people in the world who can allow Prince Anil to take the initiative to introduce him. Xie Zhou said his name, but he had a good impression of the child. I remember that after the original owner came back, he disliked this son very much. He even hated him because he looked like a good girl. After that, the child went to join the army in anger. Later, when he heard the news, it was the news that the child died in the border war. However, Xie Zhou liked the child that the original owner didn't like very much. Although this child was beautiful, he was a good boy with a good heart. Xie Jinyu was suddenly speechless and didn't know how to call the person in front of him. He went through Xie's last name in his mind. Apart from his family, he didn't expect anyone to be able to raise such a person. What the family is like. Jinyu, I'll treat you to a drink. Xie Zhou saw the little guy's embarrassment and spoke directly. He called the other person's name so intimately that Xie Jinyu's eyes widened immediately. He wanted to say you're so arrogant, but when he saw the face that looked like his father's when he was young, I couldn't say a word. Father was so gentle in the past, but now Xie Jinyu can no longer call him father, but has to call him the Holy One. Okay, he instantly became depressed, with a bit of sullenness. Shui Baokeng was not a fool. When he heard the word crown prince, he knew that he could not afford to offend the person in front of him. Then he saw that this man who was about the same age as him seemed to particularly like Brother Xie, so he winked at Xie Zhou, and then a few people changed place, arrived at the private room upstairs. This private room was booked by Xie Jinyu. Unlike the princes in the palace, Xie Jinyu lived in Prince Anil's mansion after he was 10 years old, so he was a frequent visitor on the streets of the capital. The common people also liked this handsome prince. Every time Prince Anil, the style and fabric of the clothes you wear will be out of stock, and everyone will imitate them. Now that we are seeing the new year, It is a time when people are happy. There is no saying that the night market in Beijing is closed. People can have fun all night long, watch the lanterns, eat snacks, and hang out with the people they like. Xie Jinyu was only 16 years old and a newly grown child. Naturally, he would not miss such a grand scene, so he came over early to watch the lanterns. Everyone sat at the table by the window, and then they could see the bright lanterns outside the window, not only in the shape of various flowers, but also in the shape of small animals. Suddenly, amid the cheers, at the end of the distant street, there was a bright lantern. The golden dragon was waved across the street and walked towards the side, making Xie Jinyu's eyes widen, let alone Xue Baokeng. Xue Baokeng grew up in the south of the Yangtze River, but he had never seen such a lively time. There were also golden dragon lanterns. Sure enough, everything was so brilliant and gorgeous under the emperor's feet. Xie Tingzhou watched the two children stretching their necks to look outside, and their necks were almost twisted. He took out 3 telescopes from his system warehouse and handed 2 of them to the 2 of them. What is this? The hand was cold, and it was something dark and unrecognizable, which made Xue Baokeng very curious. Xie Jinyu didn't say much. He just saw that this stranger looked similar and close to his father, so he definitely didn't talk so much. This is a telescope. Didn't you see it just now? I'll teach you to use a telescope. This thing can be seen very far away. Xie Tingzhou bought the most common 10-power telescope, which can see people 1,000 meters away, so now there is no problem looking at a lantern. Is there such a thing in the world? See far away? The 2 young men didn't believe it, but when they saw Xie Tingzhou put the dark thing in front of his eyes, they also followed his example and put the telescope in front of his glasses. What they saw next shocked them. Stayed. The distant golden lantern dragon suddenly seemed to be right in front of him. Xie Jinyu was startled and quickly looked elsewhere with the telescope. He could clearly see the soldiers patrolling on the city wall. He could even see the soldier's face. And this restaurant is probably 1,000 meters away from the city. How so? Xie Jinyu was stunned, and Xue Baokeng was even more delighted with the telescope in both hands. Oh my God! That dragon seems to be right in front of me. This divine object is so powerful. He sighed, but Xie Jinyu had already put down the telescope, and looked at the man in black robes with a complicated expression. As a prince, and a prince who knew the emperor's thoughts, Xie Jinyu was not just playing, he was suddenly sensitive. I realized that if this thing could be used in the army, wouldn't the soldiers of their great Yang dynasty be able to detect the enemy's whereabouts from 1,000 meters away? If there was a war, wouldn't that be countless more fighter planes? Thinking of this, Xie Jinyu said straightforwardly. This thing is very good, I have taken a fancy to it. He was a little nervous. It was the first time that he was oppressing others as the crown prince, and he was even a little unreasonable, but he met Xie Tingzhou's smiling eyes. I'll give it to you if you like it. When he heard the man in front of him say this, he unconsciously remembered that when he was a child in the palace, his father would give it to him whatever he liked. No. The one his father gave to him was not him, but the crown prince of King Anil. He is no longer the son of his father, but the son of King Anil. Good man, he has a golden finger. Author, Zhanghu Buletin Jian. Chapter 177. After a slow reaction, Xie Jinyu felt a little embarrassed. Why did you give it to me? He looked at the man in front of him eagerly, not knowing that what flashed in his phoenix eyes at this time was a kind of expectation belonging to a child. In fact, this child was the most pitiful. The emperor felt sorry for his younger brother who had no one to live with, so he adopted his eldest son. However, when Xie Jinyu was adopted, he was only 1 year old. Even though he was raised in the palace until he was 10 years old, the other brothers were princes, and he was the only prince. After he was 10 years old, Xie Jinyu moved out of the palace and lived alone in the huge Prince An's mansion. Even though he was surrounded by palace maids and eunuchs sent by the emperor, he left his parents when he needed them the most, and there was no one around him. Xie Jinyu was naturally different from ordinary children. However, he had to go to the palace 5 times every 7 days, but he could not see the emperor every time. He went to the palace to study in the Imperial Academy. He could only see the emperor a few times a month. It was so difficult for the emperor to see him, let alone his concubines. Even though Xie Jinyu knew that his mother was actually concubine, he did not dare to go to see her. In fact, the mother and son had only met less than 10 times in the past 16 years. Every time they looked at each other from a distance, and occasionally received gifts from each other. So Xie Jinyu did not know how pitiful he looked at Xie Tingzhou, just like a homeless puppy, now met his owner, pitiful. I will give you whatever you like in the future. Who let this child be his only son in the great Yang dynasty? Xie Tingzhou has a girlfriend in modern times, and it is definitely impossible to start a family in this world, so for this son who is only a few years younger than him, he is willing to give all kinds of things. After saying this, Xie Tingzhou took off the 3 strings of agate beads on his hand. Although this thing is very common in modern times, it is still an expensive item in the great Yang dynasty. When they met for the first time, there was no way to make it clear. Xie Tingzhou took Xie Jinyu's hand and put the bracelet on him. I am very happy to see you today. These are some small things. You wear them and play with them. Thinking in my heart, what kind of gifts would boys like? These are not enough. Next time I come, I must prepare some gifts for this son. This child was adopted early, and as a father, I must prepare more for the child. Before Xie Jinyu could react, she was held by the stranger in front of her. 3 strings of beads were worn on her fair wrist. The red agate beads made Xie Jinyu's skin even whiter. The black agate beads were round and shiny, which made people happy. There was also a string of deep and noble blue, which made people know that it was a good thing at a glance. Even Xie Jinyu, who grew up in the palace and saw many treasures, did not expect that the man in front of him would give 3 strings of agate bracelets. You know, agate bracelets of this color are rare even for the princes in the palace. Some of them were tribute to the emperor, and some were in the hands of the ladies. Xie Jinyu has many different kinds of jade pendants, but this kind of bracelet is the first time to wear it. Xie Tingzhou let go of his hand, and the warm temperature made Xie Jinyu stunned for a moment. Then she looked at the 3 agate bracelets on her wrist, and looked at Xie Tingzhou with more doubts. Why are you so good to me? He asked, and Shui Baokeng on the side did the same, looking at Xie Tingzhou cautiously, not understanding why brother Xie was so good to Xie Jinyu. They had obviously come from the same place, but brother Xie was always taciturn, but he looked very happy to meet this prince. Could it be, this is brother Xie's first sight? However, seeing that this prince is really good looking, people like him at first sight, no wonder brother Xie likes him. Why do you have to have a reason? Xie Tingzhou also asked back, leaving Xie Jinyu speechless. He touched the bracelet on his hand, and finally reached out, took off the jade pendant hanging on his waist, and handed it to Xie Tingzhou. I am very happy to see you today. This jade pendant is my personal belonging. You can take it. This is a piece of top-grade white jade, with a 4-claw jade dragon carved on it and a golden pendant hanging below. You can tell at a glance that it is not an ordinary item. Prince. The eunuch next to him wanted to remind him. After all, this jade pendant is not just a personal belonging, but it represents King Anil. If there is something in the future, showing this jade pendant can solve many problems. This is not a gift, but a favor. Shut up! Xie Jinyu glared at the eunuch next to him, and then stubbornly gave the jade pendant in his hand. Xie Tingzhou stretched out his hand, took the jade pendant in his hand, and smiled. This thing is very good, I am very happy. This is the first gift his son gave him, and Xie felt that he must keep it carefully. Xie was happy that the gift he gave was liked by others. Then he took the telescope and started to look at the lanterns. He looked everywhere. The place that was originally far away was close at hand when he looked at it with the telescope. This made Xie sigh at the magic of the telescope. Xie also taught him to adjust the magnification of the telescope, so that he could see many things comfortably. Shui Baokeng on the side always felt that brother Xie was too good to Xie, but he didn't think that Xie was clinging to the powerful. He just felt that Xie coquettish look was also uncontrollable. She obviously wanted something, but she said no, and looked at you eagerly with a pair of eyes, like a puppy. Xie reminded Shui Baokeng of his family's exquisite lion dog, so he was no longer surprised by Xie actions towards him. The swimming golden dragon was walking through the streets, and the lights were brilliant everywhere. Xie did not take a telescope, but just looked down from the third floor. It was a peaceful time and the prosperous capital city, which could be seen from the clothes of the people and such streets. The capital city was full of laughter and joy, which made people dare not imagine the tragic situation after the Turks broke through the capital city. This made Xie feel that perhaps the weather was too cold and the Turks should be extinct. For a race, the most respectful method is not to educate, but to destroy. This is Xie most real insight after traveling through multiple civilizations. Even if they are all human beings, they are born differently and have different blood flowing in their bodies, so they are not of my race. The Turks are obviously not bad on the grassland, but they just like to attack others, like to occupy other people's land, burn, kill, rob and rob. This is the plunder left in the genes, which cannot be educated, and can only make them disappear. The store owner brought good wine and food. After watching the lights for a while, the three began to eat. Xie and Shui Baokeng did not know why they started to compete with each other in drinking. Snowflakes floated in. Xie drank warm wine and watched the two young people quarreling. He thought it was pretty good now. After his identity was confirmed, Xie planned to disclose the situation to his brother. If he disappeared for a few days, no one would be surprised. He wanted to live in the Great Yang dynasty, and in another world, he also had parents and girlfriends who he cherished. He knew what to do. In the end, the two little guys were drunk, which made the servants very worried. "Go back, send your prince home." Xie spoke, and the others did not dare to object. They hurriedly and carefully helped up Xie, who was drunk, and then carried him on their backs and left. On Shui Baokeng's side, the worried manager Zhou still came over, asked someone to carry the little ancestor on his back, and then took Xie back. Xie was going to live in the Shui family, which was something Shui Baokeng had finally asked for on the road. After leaving the restaurant and getting on the carriage, it wasn't long before they arrived at the house bought by the Shui family. This was a very large house with 6 entrances. Xie place was arranged in the plum garden. Probably because it was discovered that Xie liked red plums, there were many plum trees in the plum garden, both red and white, for Xie to enjoy. After arriving at the plum garden, Xie was also tired. After all, he had been walking all the time on the road. Now that he had finally arrived in the capital, he naturally took a rest. After he entered the bedroom, he returned to the modern world. It was a little late this time, and his girlfriend Wei Qiang had fallen asleep. After Xie took a bath, he went to bed and hugged his girlfriend in his arms. Wei Qiang had long been accustomed to burying herself in her boyfriend's chest and whispering a few words. "You're back, go to sleep." She knew that it was not easy for adults to work. Although her boyfriend was on a business trip every 3 days and could only go home for one night, Wei Qiang was already very satisfied. Moreover, he had a good salary and her boyfriend didn't look that tired. Everything was fine. Xie Tingzhou kissed the tip of Wei Qiang's nose and fell asleep with her in his arms. In the Yang dynasty, Xie Jinyu, who returned to the Anil palace, slept soundly until the sun rose the next day. After waking up, he still had a headache, but his brain was still working. He raised his arm and saw the 3 bracelets on his hand and the black telescope on the table beside the bed. It was not a dream, everything that happened yesterday was not a dream. Thinking of this, Xie Jinyu immediately woke up, picked up the telescope, and rushed out of the yard. He asked someone to take a ladder and sit on the wall of the Anil palace. With the telescope, Xie Jinyu saw the palace at once. This time it was a very clear palace, which made him surprised and happy, but also a little scared. If this kind of magical object fell into the hands of thieves. Thinking of this, Xie Jinyu hurried down from the roof, changed into a red brocade robe, and rushed directly to the palace with people. It was already noon. If other people did not have the emperor's summons, they would not be allowed to enter the palace, but Prince Anil was different, so Xie Jinyu was allowed to enter directly. Xie Jinyu went straight to the emperor's study. Knowing that the court meeting had not yet dispersed, he waited outside anxiously. Looking at the telescope in his hand, he felt that it was very hot. And the man who looked like the emperor. Who is he? Good man, he has a golden finger. Author, Zhanghu Buletin Jian. Chapter 178. There was no peace in the court today. The civil servants and military attaches were almost quarreling below. The emperor, who was sitting on the dragon throne, was not angry and assertive. He just looked down and allowed the courtiers below to be as chaotic as in a vegetable market. In a ball. The Turks are like beasts. Now they are harassing the border in winter. This time they are massacring people on a large scale. Since you are in Kyoto, you can't see this. So you just don't send troops. If you don't send troops, the people on the border deserve to die. Right? I hate you weaklings the most. You have to get someone to knock on your door before you can resist, right? The person who was furious at this time was General Meng, who had been a general when the Supreme Emperor was here. He was a real general. It is said that the children of these generals rarely died well, but when the Supreme Emperor was here, he trusted General Meng extraordinarily. After the general was wounded on the battlefield, he retreated and handed back the military talisman. The 6 sons he gave birth to later went to the border to garrison and were scattered in various places. After many years of death and injury, only 1 son remained. If the Yang dynasty and the Turks had a mortal feud, then General Meng's family had a blood feud with the Turks. 5 of the 6 children returned home carrying the coffin, and the white-haired one sent the black-haired one away. There was a reason why General Meng hated the Turks so much. General Meng's words are wrong. It's a very cold winter. Not to mention that the Turks are good at guerrilla tactics. If all the troops of our great Yang dynasty are used against the Turks, how will we arrange the food and grass? If we launch a campaign in winter, Beijing will China can't support it, won't it be the people who will suffer? The person who spoke was from the first rank of the Hubei Shangshu. He was in charge of the treasury. Naturally, he knew that the treasury of the great Yang dynasty now had grain and grass. But if a war was launched in winter, how would the grain and grass be transported out? Besides, the Queen Mother's birthday is coming soon, and there is really no end to blood. General Meng, you can't just look at it. Others were also trying to persuade him, but these words were like adding fuel to the fire, making General Meng even more angry. If it weren't for his poor health and missing a leg, he would have gone to the battlefield to kill the enemy. That's right, General Meng has a broken leg. His face was red with anger at this time, and he got into a quarrel with the literati. The same was true for other generals. They were all bloody people, and they vaguely felt that the Holy Emperor wanted to send troops, so naturally they refused to give in. In this way, the court hall was as noisy as a vegetable market. The emperor, who was sitting on the dragon chair, took a sip of herbal tea and then coughed twice. At this moment, all the literati and military generals fell silent. They each returned to their positions and bowed their heads respectfully, not daring to look at the Holy One above them. Dear ladies, have you come up with a result after deliberation? The current emperor is 40 years old this year, which is when middle-aged people are at their strongest. At this time, the steady voice spread throughout the hall, making the officials below dare not say a word. It seems there is none. Xie Guanyu, now the holy emperor, glanced at the courtiers below and did not blame them. The Turks' harassment of the border will not be discussed for the time being. Tomorrow, all my dear friends will submit a memorial. My mother's birthday is coming soon, and I don't want my mother to have to worry about these things. Naturally, the emperor had his own meaning in what he said. Everyone below them immediately bowed their heads in greeting, and the topic turned to the Queen Mother's 60th birthday. After some discussion, they retired from the court. Coming out of the main hall, the emperor looked indifferent. The companion who had accompanied him since childhood knew that the emperor was feeling uncomfortable. He thought of the news reported by the little eunuch below and said quickly, "Your Majesty, Prince Anil came to the palace in the morning. He said he wanted to see you for something. He is waiting eagerly outside the imperial study." As soon as these words came out, the emperor felt much better. Thinking of his eldest son, in fact, the emperor's first son, who doesn't feel sorry for him. But he still adopted the child to his younger brother, and now he is trembling with fear when the child enters the palace, and his heart softens. "You are outside. Why don't you take me to the study to wait? The imperial study is very large, with a side hall specially designed to accommodate people." "Don't worry, Your Majesty. The chamberlain below has arranged His Royal Highness in the side hall. It's freezing outside now, so Your Majesty came here early. I'm afraid he might have some good things to give to Your Majesty. Your Majesty is always thinking of His Majesty." The endearing words of the eldest companion made the emperor's face feel a little softer. Thinking of this son, he was quite gentle. He does not expect the son to do anything big in the future, as long as he can be the king of peace and happiness, just like his mother and he once expected for his younger brother. Peace and joy are what he wants in his life. While he was talking, the emperor had already arrived at the imperial study. As soon as he sat down, Xie Jinyu was invited over by his companion. After all, at this time, only His Royal Highness could make the emperor happy. "Greetings to the Holy One." Kneeling down to salute, Xie Jinyu had long been accustomed to the distance between him and the person in front of him. He was obviously his father, but he was the farthest away. Get up, the emperor was a little curious. This child didn't dare to see him in the past, but now he took the initiative to come to the palace, fearing that something might happen. Xie Jinyu got up from the ground. The companion beside him had already placed a chair for Xie Jinyu and asked the child to sit down under the emperor's gaze. Sitting there, Xie Jinyu was also a little restless and did not dare to look directly at the face of the Holy Lord. He just looked at the ground and said eagerly, "I came to the palace this time to find a sacred object, and I came here specifically to offer it to the Holy One." He looked a little afraid of the emperor, but the emperor looked at his eldest son, feeling helpless. When he was the prince, all his first children were women. This is why the emperor always did not want the prince to ascend the throne. He thought that he could only go further if the prince gave birth to a son. But later, the younger brother experienced 2 poisonings and died tragically. The emperor was so shocked that he died. The 22-year-old prince ascended the throne and became the emperor. At that time, he already had 5 daughters. It took 2 years to have such a first. Xie Jinyu, the eldest son. The emperor was absolutely lying when he said he didn't feel sorry for the child. After his concubine gave birth to such a son, he directly made her a concubine. Although the child was adopted to his younger brother after he was 1 year old, The emperor watched him grow up since he was a child. Moreover, King Anil's future fiefdom in Jiangnan will also be given to this child. Raise your head, if you want anything, look at me and talk. Nowadays, the emperor has few people in the palace who can speak to him. Apart from his mother and queen, his sons are as afraid of him as tigers and leopards, let alone the concubines in the palace. The emperor enjoys being the leader among thousands of people. But it is really lonely. Xie Jinyu raised his head, and his beautiful face made the emperor look at it a few more times. He thought to himself that this boy is getting more and more beautiful. How will he arrange for this child to be a royal concubine in the future? 16 is not too young anymore. The last time the queen asked the child if he had a girl he liked, the child was still blushing. Looking up tremblingly, Xie Jinyu saw His Majesty's face that had a look of age. Xie Jinyu suddenly thought of the person he met last night. His Majesty looked like that person when he got older. He was really exactly the same. Your Majesty, this is the divine object brought by His Royal Highness. After checking the telescope and confirming that it was not poisonous or a lethal weapon, Daban took the thing up and placed it on the table. Seeing the telescope, Xie Jinyu suddenly thought of Xie Ting's smiling eyes, and immediately spoke directly without fear of the saint. Your Majesty, this is a telescope. As long as you put it in front of your eyes, you can see far away. I saw the soldiers on the city wall at the White Jade Tower before. Please give it a try. He thought that if such a magical object could be used on the battlefield, wouldn't the great Yang dynasty be invincible? The emperor was also interested in this thing. He stretched out his hand, picked up the telescope, put it in front of his eyes, and then looked straight outside the room. This was incredible. He actually saw the front directly from the telescope. The palace guard who changed guard even saw the other party's appearance clearly. If you take the telescope away, you can't see anything, but if you put it in front of you, you can see this person right in front of you. In an instant, the emperor also knew the function of this thing, immediately stood up and walked outside. Everyone quickly followed and saw that after the emperor left the imperial study, he stood at the door and looked into the distance with the telescope. The farthest distance was that he could see the palace gate. Such a long distance made the emperor unable to bear it. His mind was agitated. This thing is indeed a divine thing. I'm afraid I can see people thousands of meters away in front of me. The imperial study room was at least a kilometer away from the palace gate, but the emperor could clearly see the people over there, and he suddenly had a different view of this thing. Yes, Your Majesty, the person who gave this thing to me said that this thing can see the scenery thousands of meters away. If this thing can be used on the battlefield, then our army of the great Yang dynasty can be invincible. On the battlefield, seizing the opportunity is the most powerful thing. Xie Jinyu also learned the art of war, so naturally he expected this thing to play a good role on the battlefield. As soon as the emperor heard the child's words, he knew that the child was sincere. With such a magical object, he was the first to be sent to the palace. He thought of the army and did not put it in his hands to play with. He was indeed a good child. Reaching out and patting Xie Jinyu's shoulder, the emperor looked like a kind father. Jinyu has me in his heart, as well as the people of the dawn of our great Yang dynasty. Daban, I will take Jinyu to Zhen's private treasury to pick out a few items he likes later. You can choose whatever he likes. The companion on the side said hey. Xie Jinyu was stunned for a moment by the sudden intimacy of the Holy Master, and then immediately reacted and knelt down. I thank the Holy Spirit for this gift. Such observance of etiquette made the emperor feel sour in his heart, but he also knew that their identities were different now, so he could only sigh in his heart. Get up. When Xie Jinyu stood up again, the emperor was no longer as gentle as before. However, Xie Jinyu did not feel uncomfortable. On the contrary, he felt that such a saint was the saint in his heart. Some didn't know whether to talk about that person or not, and Xie Jinyu's tangled look caught the emperor's eyes. What's so embarrassing? Is it for you to look like this in front of me? The emperor still loved his son very much. Although this son was given to his younger brother, he was nominally his younger brother's son, but the bloodline was continuous. When Siejinyu heard such questions, he didn't continue to struggle and said directly, "Your Majesty, I met a person last night who looks very similar to you, just like you when you were young. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Good man, he has a golden finger." Author, Jonghu Buletin. Chapter 179. Someone similar to me. When the emperor heard his son's words, the childish face of his younger brother suddenly appeared in his mind. In fact, the emperor's position as prince was not very stable at that time. The emperor loved the imperial concubine extremely much, otherwise there would be no imperial concubine under the queen. With such a rank, he also doted on the son of the imperial concubine. Although the emperor named him a prince at that time, he was not pleased with him because he grew older and became stronger. Until the queen mother, who was the empress at the time, once again had a son in old age. At that time, the emperor was having difficulty accepting the passing of years, but found that he still had a son. Being able to be so ferocious and able to make the old queen pregnant made her even more happy. It is said that when the queen mother was pregnant, the emperor dreamed of a divine bird coming with a jade in its mouth. The red divine bird had golden beads in its mouth. The divine bird hovered over the great Yong dynasty and spit out the golden beads in its mouth. Such a child. Therefore, after his younger brother was born, he never gave him a name. Instead, he was called by the nickname Zuzwar. At that time, the emperor already had several daughters, and he loved his newborn brother in every possible way. Coupled with the benefits his younger brother brought to him, the emperor really liked his younger brother. Later, the younger brother was poisoned twice in order to save the emperor, and the second time he lost his life. The emperor was in great pain, and the emperor, as the elder brother, cried bitterly every day. Even though the emperor killed all the people, the emperor still felt uncomfortable. After the death of the supreme emperor, the crown prince ascended the throne. What he did in the first year after he ascended the throne was to crush the ashes of the imperial concubine and her family, who had killed his younger brother, and spread the ashes of all the 9 clans. At that time, it also caused admonitions from court officials and the death of a minister. Later, the emperor tried every means to adopt a son for his younger brother. A few years later, he began to prepare to move his younger brother to the emperor's mausoleum. However, he found that his younger brother's coffin was empty. Very few people knew about this. There was only the queen mother and her eldest son. Now that the eldest son said this, the emperor's expression suddenly changed from doubtful to condensed. "Oh, my imperial brother actually has a thief pretending to be his brother. Please pass on my instructions to the palace guards to quickly investigate, seize this person, and execute him with 1,000 cuts." King Anil is the absolute weakness in the hearts of the emperor and the queen mother. If anyone encounters him, he will definitely die. Siejinyu was also startled and quickly knelt on the ground with his forehead on the ground. "Your Majesty, I dare to plead for that person. In fact, last night was the first time I met that person. It was like meeting the former Holy One. This telescope was given to me by that person. This person's identity is wrong. I am willing investigate for your Majesty." He knelt on the cold ground. At this time, he understood the consequences of the emperor's anger, but he was still willing to plead for Sietingjo last night. The emperor glanced at him with lowered eyes, and finally saw the 3-color agate bracelet on Siejinyu's arm. He had never seen this bracelet before, and he had not given it to Siejinyu. Where did it come from? As a father, although he sent his son away, the emperor was in control of the entire Anil palace. He knew clearly what his son was eating, drinking, and wearing. This thing definitely did not come from the palace. Oh, that man seems to like you very much, Jinyu. You are the heir apparent of Prince Anil's palace. It's fine that he looks similar to me, but he should never come in front of you. This agate bracelet in your hand, who gave it to me? The emperor saw through the origin of this thing at a glance. Xie Jinyu immediately kowtowed again. Back to your majesty, this agate bracelet was indeed given to me by that person. As soon as I met that person, I felt that the other person was friendly, so I gave him a personal jade pendant in return. I asked your majesty for your understanding. While talking, Xie Jinyu had already taken off the three-color bracelet, and his companion at the side took it and brought it to the emperor. The emperor also stretched out his hand and looked at the bracelet with such fine workmanship. Then he thought about the sudden appearance of the person, fearing that it was caused by an aristocratic family. He slid his fingertips and let the agate bracelet spin in his hand. Oh! Even so, then I will ask Zhao Guangzong, the left commander of the Royal Forest Army, to investigate this person with you and give me an explanation within 3 days. This is giving this kid a chance. Xie Jinyu immediately continued to kowtow and hit the wall with his forehead, which even made a sound. I thank you for your grace. The emperor was accustomed to this and sighed as he looked at the child's trembling appearance. Get up. Since you are all here in the palace, you will have lunch with me before leaving. When Xie Jinyu started to thank him, his forehead was already red and his hands were also red. When the emperor saw the emperor's expression, he quickly ordered someone to arrange medicine to eliminate the redness and swelling when the emperor entered the study. By lunchtime, the emperor already knew how to use this telescope. He could adjust the distance. At the farthest, he could see 1,000 meters away. The most important thing was that when this thing was used at a high place, he could have an unobstructed view of his surroundings. And everyone's eyes see slightly different things. The emperor has asked the leader of the Royal Forest Army to try this magical object, and it is indeed more powerful. In the hands of a general, this thing plays a greater role. Xie Jinyu took the medicine, but still did not dare to speak while eating, for fear that she might accidentally kill someone. The emperor was indifferent, and there was no rule about not speaking when eating or sleeping. He just asked a question, and Xie Jinyu just answered, showing a bit of a loving father and a filial son. While Xie Jinyu felt uncomfortable eating in the palace, Xie Tingzhou and Xue Baokeng ate comfortably in the Xue mansion. There are 8 cooks in Xue mansion who are proficient in dishes from all over the Yang dynasty. Although the 2 of them got up late, they were well prepared for the lunch meal. The 2 of them didn't say anything and were both eating. Xue Baokeng looked at Xie Tingzhou secretly. He wanted to ask something, but he didn't dare to ask. Xie Tingzhou didn't look at him, he was just thinking about other things. Last night, he speculated that he had an inseparable relationship with King Anil, but the system really gave him something good. The memory of King Anil. King Anil died young, at the age of 5, but the memories before the age of 5 entered Xie Tingzhou's mind directly, allowing Xie Tingzhou to see his prince brother and his former queen mother at a glance. His birth brought joy to the entire royal family, the benefits it brought to the prince, the joy it brought to his mother, and even the supreme emperor, the old man who was always wary of his son, loved him in every possible way and gave him all kinds of treasures. Reward him. These people's good memories of Xie Tingzhou affected his thoughts, making Xie Tingzhou unconsciously think that it has been 16 years now, and he doesn't know how the prince's brother is doing now. Does his mother still love flowers and plants as much as before? Some want to meet them. Xie Tingzhou knew that with the telescope, his stupid son would be sent to his door stupidly, and then the investigation against him would begin, so Xie Tingzhou was still looking forward to meeting his brother, the prince, who had now become an emperor. He remembered that when he was a child, the prince brother said that he would fight off the Huns and protect all the people of the Yang dynasty. He, who was less than 5 years old at the time, promised that he would give all the rewards given by his father to the prince brother and let the prince brother fight. Hans. Thinking of the deep brotherhood and intimacy between mother and son at that time made Xie Tingzhou feel very good. Shui Baoken hesitated for a while before saying embarrassedly, "Brother Xie, I remembered what happened last night. Although I am presumptuous, I still want to ask, why are you so nice to that prince? You gave him such expensive things and a telescope when we first met." Shui Baoken's telescope was taken back by Xie Tingzhou, so Shui Baoken watched eagerly. He is jealous. Why is brother Xie so nice to others? They were all the same young men, and they tried every means to please brother Xie, but as soon as Xie Jinyu appeared, brother Xie's good fortune was immediately taken away. Anyway, Shui Baoken didn't think that Xie Tingzhou was trying to please the noble people. How could a noble person like brother Xie please others easily? Xie Tingzhou smiled when he saw the child's unconcealed curiosity and a little jealousy. "I am saving your life. The crown prince is my junior, so it is normal to give you some gifts." As soon as he said these words, Shui Baoken's cheeks suddenly turned red. Thinking that he should have questioned brother Xie about such a thing, he really shouldn't have. He quickly stood up, saluted Xie Tingzhou, and apologized very shamefully. "Brother Xie, it's all my fault. It's my narrow-mindedness. I finally met a friend like brother Xie who fell in love with me at first sight, but I was afraid of being snatched away. Brother Xie, don't blame me. I'm happy to be walking with brother Xie all the way, reluctant to be separated from brother Xie." He was still a child and spoke very sincerely. He blushed and apologized, but Xie Tingzhou did not embarrass him. "I'm not unhappy, but I really can't give you this telescope. I'm afraid that this thing has fallen into the hands of the Holy One, and the Holy One will invite me to the palace soon. This thing is of no benefit to you." This straightforward message to Shui Baoken in front of him made Shui Baoken understand the situation immediately. The function of the telescope is not only to see the scenery, but also has more uses. Shui Baoken immediately expressed his gratitude. "Thank you, brother Xie, for thinking about me. I can't thank you enough, so I can only offer you a glass of wine." Even if this matter was over, after lunch, Xie Tingzhou went back to his plum garden to rest. After a while, Butler Zhou sent a box of things and only said that it was from Shui Baoken to express his gratitude. Xie Tingzhou accepted it without looking at it. When the others left, he asked Xie Yi to open the box, and then he discovered that it turned out to be a box of jade pendants. Yes, the Shui family is so rich. They have many shops in Beijing and several jade mines. Last night, I saw that Xie Tingzhou liked the jade pendant given by Xie Jinyu. He did not have the noble status of the prince, but he was not short of money. A whole big box of jade pendants was delivered, with hundreds of them. The mutton fat jade is white and flawless, emerald green and clear, and there are also a few pieces of jade pendants of different colors that are even more beautifully carved. They are all Shui Baoken's thoughts. The total of these would cost hundreds of thousands of taels, but Shui Baoken gave them directly to Xie Tingzhou. After reading this, Xie Tingzhou laughed. This child really won't grow up. He said he was not jealous, but turned around and delivered a box of jade pendants. He was a child with a strong heart. Good man, he has a golden finger. Author, Zhanghu Buletin Jian. Chapter 180. This was also the child's kindness. Xie Tingzhou put it directly into his own system warehouse. I have to say that this system warehouse is very easy to use. As long as you want to put something in it, you can put it in at a thought. And then think of something and take it out. Xie Tingzhou's space is now 12 square meters. In addition to Xie Tingzhou's own daily belongings, there are telescopes. This large number of telescopes are Xie Tingzhou's gift to the prince's brother. Of course, he is no longer the prince brother, and now he wants to call the other party a saint. If these jadeite stones were sold in modern times, they would definitely be worth a lot of money. However, in the modern world, jewelry and jadeites all have a premium. Most of them require brands and certificates. But if these jade pendants are given to family members and friends, couldn't be better. Xieting Zhou discovered that these jade pendants include not only round jade pendants, but also ones in the shape of small animals, which are particularly cute and can be given to parents and girlfriends. Xieting Zhou felt comfortable here, but Xie Jinyu, who had finished lunch with the Lord, finally had the opportunity to leave the palace. 3 strings of bracelets were left directly in the palace. He didn't understand what the Lord was thinking, which made Xie Jinyu look unhappy. "I'm sorry to bother you, Commander Zhao." In the next few days Xie Jinyu thought of the emperor's calm and self-respecting appearance, and suddenly felt that it was actually quite good that he was the Prince of Anil. If he had to see his father every day like other princes, then it would be really scary. In the eyes of Xie Jinyu, the previous saint could only be admired and not dared to look directly at, but now he would kill a person with just a few words, which really scared Xie Jinyu. A 16-year-old boy has never seen a dead person. "Your Majesty's words are serious. In my humble duty, I also obey the orders of the Holy One. I am assisting the Crown Prince in this investigation and will present the results to His Majesty Bing Sheng." Zhao Guangzong, the left commander of the Royal Forest Army in the palace, also respected the prince very much. After all, Xie Jinyu was the prince on the surface, but in fact everyone knew that in terms of blood, the prince was the Holy Son. Even for other princes, the prince had no respect for him. "The prince loves him a lot." Yes, Xie Jinyu nodded, actually a little unhappy. After all, yesterday he felt that he had met someone who seemed to be close to him, and now he had to investigate the other person, which really made him feel uncomfortable. How to say it? When he saw this person for the first time, Xie Jinyu was also wary. Just as the Lord thought, he thought that such a person had ulterior motives for deliberately appearing in front of him. But when he sat with him, Xie Jinyu didn't know why. Inexplicably, I feel extraordinarily close to this person, maybe because he has a similar appearance to the Holy Master, or maybe it's something else. Anyway, it's a mysterious feeling. He felt that the other person looked at him with a familiar look, as if he was looking at another person through himself. There were also things that he had looked at a few times, and the other party took the initiative to give them to him, which made Xie Jinyu very embarrassed. Now that he really wanted to investigate the other party, Xie Jinyu calmed down and said directly, "The Crown Prince drank with this person yesterday. In addition to this person, there is also Xue Baokeng of the Xue family. As long as you find Xue Baokeng, you can know the identity of this person. Compared to a headless stranger, Xue Baokeng's identity is much easier to explain." As soon as these words came out, Zhao Guangzong immediately responded. "The person the prince is talking about is Xuejiyu's younger brother, Xue Baokeng, the son of the Xue family of the imperial merchant. You know him?" Xie Jinyu was a little confused, but he didn't expect Zhao Guangzong to know this Xue Baokeng. "Of course I don't know him, but yesterday the Xue family sent a lot of treasures, and some of them were sent to Xuejiyu's palace. I just happened to check these items, and then I found out that Xuejiyu's younger brother also followed him to Beijing. Now I'm afraid I plan to wait for the Holy One to summon me." Zhao Guangzong didn't like these merchants, but the Xue family really won the heart of the Holy Emperor. Every year, they sent a lot of money to replenish the Holy Emperor's private treasury. They said they were worried that Empress Xue would miss her family in the palace. In fact, the money all entered the Holy Sage's private treasury. There was something sent to Xuejiyu, but what Zhao Guangzong checked was the 2 million taels of silver that came to Beijing together this time, and had been put into the Holy Emperor's private treasury yesterday. It can be said that the reason why the Holy One wanted to fight the Huns was because there was indeed money in the private treasury in recent years, So he came up with such an idea. I see. Does Commander Zhao know about the Shui family's house in Beijing? We can just go find it? Xie Jinyu didn't think much about it, he just felt that it was not easy for a family like the Shui family to have a queen who became an imperial merchant, so she would naturally do everything possible to please her, so it was normal to send the queen mother's birthday gift in advance. In this humble position, I will ask someone to investigate. The results will be known as soon as we arrive at the palace gate. The Royal Forest Army's connections are naturally very fast, so it is not easy to investigate a person. So Xie Jinyu and Zhao Guangzhong walked towards the palace gate, but they didn't expect to meet several adults who had left the palace at noon and now returned to the palace. All of them were military generals. Xie Jinyu greeted these people. The adults also knew that this prince was deeply favored by the Holy Emperor, so they were naturally very considerate. After leaving the palace gate, someone from the Royal Forest Army had already come to report on the Shui family's residence in the capital. Xie Jinyu got on the carriage and was surprised to realize that she was a little cold due to the cold wind that she had walked all the way. The generals who were summoned in the palace were also a little curious as to what happened that caused the Holy Emperor to summon him in such a hurry. When they arrived at the place, they got the divine object mentioned by the Holy One. They were initially confused when they saw this dark thing, but when the first general tried the telescope, he was shocked. This is a divine thing. The other generals were also confused, and after trying them out one by one, the expressions on their faces were all wrong. How on earth is such a divine object made? Studying this telescope, everyone couldn't figure it out, but in an instant they could see what people looked like thousands of meters away. The people present were all generals marching and fighting. Naturally, they understood that if there was such a thing in the army, wouldn't it be hundreds of thousands of meters away? Victory. You know, once you have the initiative and the whereabouts of the enemy, you can immediately arrange your troops and formations. With such an artifact, every general present said that he will be able to win every battle. If this thing is used against the Huns, what do you think? The emperor spoke slowly, he already had a plan in mind, and there was also someone his silly son met. This thing is so exquisite, is it unique in the world, or are there others? Thinking of this, the emperor wanted to meet this person who looked similar to himself no matter what. Of course it's great. The Huns are good at guerrilla warfare. If we stand on a high place and use this magical object to observe the surrounding situation, even if the Huns want to attack, it will be impossible. Many military generals immediately began to talk about their strategies, and everyone was in a lively mood. Regarding the matter of launching a war against the Huns, everyone could actually feel that even if the Holy Emperor did not send troops before the year, he would still send troops to attack the Huns after the year. Defeating the Huns has always been the wish and goal of the Holy One. The palace was very lively, and the outside of Shui's house was also lively. The Royal Forest Army brought many people this time, all wearing armor and riding war horses. Now hundreds of people came outside Shui's house, so that no one around them dared to act rashly. The concierge closed the door tightly, for fear of something happening. After all, the identity of this imperial guard can be known at a glance. He will only go somewhere if the emperor gives an order. Now that he appears here, can he not be frightened? Note that in addition to being an army that protects the emperor, the royal guards are also elite soldiers and generals who raid homes in the capital every time. Every time an official committed a crime, it was the imperial guards who ransacked their homes. Shuizai was surrounded by people, which was really scary. The concierge was already kneeling on the ground, trembling. Someone had already reported it before. Zhao Guangzhong was sitting on the horse, looking majestic at this time. In the carriage behind was Xie Jinyu who was holding the heater. After a while, Manager Zhou ran over and knelt on the ground. "My lord, I will pay my respects to my lord." He knelt on the ground and did not dare to ask any more questions, Zhao Guangzhong said directly. Where is Xue Baokan, the son of the Xue family? As soon as these words came out, Manager Zhou immediately replied. The young master is at home. May I ask, sir, if something happened to our Xue family? He knelt on the ground and did not dare to make any move. He knew that in a capital like this, no matter how nice the name of the Xue family royal merchant was, it was of no use. They would kneel down when they saw any official. At this moment, Xie Jinyu, who was in the carriage, opened the curtain and walked out. There were servants kneeling on the ground. Xie Jinyu stepped down and saw Manager Zhou kneeling there. This prince wants to come to the Xue family to visit friends. Commander Zhao, please don't scare this innocent member of the Xue family. At this time, Zhao Guangzhong had also dismounted. After hearing His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's instructions, he immediately saluted to express his understanding. Manager Zhou was relieved when he saw that it was His Royal Highness the Crown Prince who had been drinking with the young ancestor last night, and quickly forced out a smile. When the prince can come to the Xue family, he will be in full glory. The young master is inside, and the villain will lead the prince in. Finally able to stand up, Housekeeper Zhou quickly brought His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and the commander of the Imperial Guard Army through the door. He felt very scared in his heart. After all, if His Royal Highness was the only one coming, why did the Imperial Guard Army follow him? What happened? Xue Baokan was looking at the account book when he was informed by the servant that His Royal Highness was at the residence. Then he hurried out of the study and met Xie Jinyu in the hall. Xue Baokan pays homage to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. He is just an ordinary person, and he is kneeling down to salute at this moment. Get up. Xie Jinyu was not too entangled in Xue Baokan's affairs and just asked. Where was the person who was with you last night? Xue Baokan guessed that the other party came to see Brother Xie, so he was not surprised and said quickly. In the plum garden of the mansion, His Royal Highness is looking for Brother Xie.